From September 2019 to January of 2020, Australia's bushfires burned through roughly 60,000 square kilometers of land. That's more than the entire area of Croatia or the equivalent area of the dot over Europe here. And that's just the beginning. The fires continue destroying everything in their way and show no signs of stopping. So what would happen if fires spread across the continent? Could Australia ever recover from the terrifying scale of the devastation? And how will the rest of the world be affected? Let's find out. Before I reveal the devastating effect of a fire raging through the entirety of Australia, let's find out just how devastating the fires currently are. Bushfires are slow-moving fires that have a high heat output, which usually pass in 2 to 5 minutes, and are often triggered by natural sources such as lightning strikes. This is why some fires start in the middle of Australia's famous desert for no apparent reason. But closer to more populated areas, these fires are sometimes caused by campfires, cigarettes, electrical arcing, and even arson. In some instances, controlled fires are used to clear the flammable brush to prevent an even larger, uncontrolled fire from benefiting from it. But sometimes a combination of conditions such as severe droughts and heat waves turn the flora into tinder. Add into that some strong winds, and you've got a recipe for a fast-moving, high-fueled bushfire that can be difficult to bring under control. The reason wind is so important here is because not only does it add more oxygen to fuel the intensity of the fire, but it also influences which direction it travels. As you can see here from our active fire data, the spread of the current fires over the last few weeks is quickly moving south, which is led by the strength and direction of the wind. Over the next few weeks, these winds are predicted to get even stronger. The speed at which a bushfire spreads depends highly on both the region and time of year. December through February are usually the hottest months on average across the Australian continent. But Australia recorded its hottest day on record on 18th December 2019 with an average maximum temperature of 41.9 degrees Celsius. However, it's expected that Eastern Australia will have drier than average weather until April 2020, meaning it's at high risk of the bushfires continuing to spread quickly, as they'll have even more fuel and less resistance in the hot, dry climate. But on the west and south coast, January through April is expected to be slightly wetter than average, historically making it harder for bushfires to start and spread in those areas. So why is this bushfire so bad? Recent research shows that rainfall deficiencies between January 2017 and August 2019 has pulled a vast majority of the eastern and southern coast into drought, with some areas showing the lowest rainfall on record and very few areas showing anything above average. In New South Wales and areas near Brisbane, both states experienced record low soil moistures. 2019 also brought with it low humidity and high wind speeds, which is an incredibly dry cocktail of elements that don't go down smoothly. So far, these fires have consumed more than twice the area that burned in the Amazon rainforest during 2019, and it's showing no signs of slowing down. Even though the fires are licking at the edges of some of the most densely populated areas in Australia, it's not just the flames that has the country concerned. The amount of smoke that has been produced by these flames is reported to be over 5.5 million kilometers squared in size. For perspective, that's more than half the size of Europe shown by the larger circle on the map here. Currently, it's blowing with the wind currents away from the main continent as far as New Zealand, meaning ambient air pollution levels have risen sharply in areas around the coast of New South Wales. Elevated concentrations of particle pollutions have been linked to respiratory problems, but over an extended period of time, they can begin to trigger illnesses such as heart attacks and strokes. Oh, and you want a cherry on top of this smoldering piece of cake? It's recently been reported that the power and intensity of these particular bushfires are causing their own weather phenomenon called pyrocumulonimbus thunderstorms, or as NASA describes it, the fire-breathing dragon of clouds. Move over, Sharknado. It's an incredibly complex process in which the smoke from an extremely powerful fire is propelled into the atmosphere from an intense updraft where it becomes part of the clouds. The faster this happens, the more likely it is to spark lightning. This produces a thunderstorm. However, the rain from the storm evaporates from the heat before it can reach the ground. So rain from a pyrocumulonimbus won't put out fires, but will spark lightning that will cause even more fires. It's a vicious cycle. Seeing how quickly the bushfires have spread so far, it's easy to assume the worst. But based on the fire reports and expert opinions given so far, these most recent bushfires aren't going to completely consume Australia. Since the continent is so large, less than 1% of it has caught on fire this bushfire season. Let's break this down into some numbers. Since the start of the country's bushfire season in September, it's been reported that an estimated 60,000 kilometers squared has been burned over the continent. Up to the start of January, that's around 124 days, meaning 483 kilometers squared have been lost daily. That's an area just over the size of the Caribbean island of Barbados every single day. But with Australia's entire area of 7.692 million kilometers squared, and taking out what's already been affected, it would take approximately 16,145 days for the fire to reach every last inch of Australia. That's about 44 years. Or if you really want to put that date in your diary, somewhere around November 2063. So Australia isn't going to entirely burn down anytime soon, despite how apocalyptic images and videos of parts of it seem. Also, with the predicted rainfall coming over the next few months, it doesn't seem plausible to assume that there would be enough of a fuel source for these fires to completely consume Australia. But for theory's sake, let's say it did, burning all burnable vegetation and buildings in its wake. What kinds of impact would the world see off the back of this? Let's talk about the economics to start. Here's a pie chart showing a breakdown of Australia's GDP by sector. GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product, which measures the value of all goods and services made within the country in a standard year. Australia's GDP is currently 1.323 trillion US dollars, which would drastically decrease in this hypothetical scenario. The different colors represent different sectors, from primary sectors like agriculture and mining, secondary sectors like manufacturing, tertiary sectors like retail, quaternary sectors including services like education, and quinary sectors like hospitality and health. As you can see, because Australia is a highly developed nation, the majority of its economy is service-based. In the immediate term following a nationwide fire, Australia's economy would be destroyed. Agricultural land and mines across the country would be in ruins, and this would send shockwaves through world prices. Australia is the largest producer of iron ore in the world, which is used to produce iron and steel, an essential component to modern life as it makes up our buildings, cars, trains, ships, machinery, tools, bridges, and literally thousands more items. Australia contributes to over 50% of the world's total iron ore exports. Without the ability to continue mining and transporting these raw materials, the deficit would be catastrophic for the infrastructure and construction industries across the globe. It could lead to the halting of major building projects and ultimately force up the prices of goods and services around the world relating to buildings, cars, trains, ships, machinery, tools, bridges. You get the point. Valuable secondary and tertiary sectors and industries would also immediately be destroyed. With all manufacturing plants, utility services, and transportation systems burned to a crisp, these industries would be non-existent. Tourism would also be totally annihilated from day one. A desolate, charred ghost town is something only a minority of urban explorers would pay lots of money to visit. Without places to go to work or enough capital to rebuild, numerous service-based businesses will immediately go bankrupt. It would cause a massive displacement of Australia's population. 24.6 million people left without a home, with potentially hundreds of thousands of deaths. People may be able to dodge the fire for safety in the immediate term, but its effects will linger and force mass immigration. Immigration of this scale would be the largest displacement in modern history. Although Australia has a migrant population of about 7.3 million who may move back to their homeland, 70% of the population is made up by Australian-born Aussies. Current migration trends show around 40% of Australian immigrants move to the UK, New Zealand, or the United States. That would put a lot of strain on countries around the world to cope, and Australia will encounter a massive brain drain, hampering any rebound in its service industries. So it's clear that a nationwide fire is a doomsday-like scenario for Australia. But there would be some winners on the global stage. With higher world prices for commodities like iron ore, other large producers would get more for their supply. Countries like Brazil, being the second largest iron ore producer in the world, would actually benefit from the fire. Likewise, other developed nations would also benefit. With so many service-based Australian businesses being unable to function for an extended period of time, countries like the UK and America would financially prosper. University students would go to study in Europe and North America instead, and high-value-based industries like finance and insurance will boom in economic centers like London and New York, sucking up all demand previously fulfilled by Australian firms, as well as benefiting from a huge influx of Australian workers and human capital. It's all a very gloomy thought, but over time, Australia may recover. The scale of destruction would be similar to flattened cities seen during World War II, but like World War II, there may be a period of economic expansion caused by large investments on spending projects to rebuild the country's infrastructure. The government will likely raise money by issuing government bonds. Depending on how likely investors think more fires would be in the future, these bonds may have extremely high interest rates, locking the Australian government into a vicious debt cycle. But there would be a silver lining. Australia's construction industry would boom, with new shops, offices, and houses being built across the land. The burned land would contain extremely fertile soil for a few years, helping agriculture to a degree. With this, a massive recompositing of GDP and wealth towards those best able to capitalize on these opportunities. Environmentally, however, it would be even more of a disaster. To date, it's estimated that up to 500 million plants and animals are believed to have perished in the fires, including 30% of all Australian koalas, placing them in danger of becoming a threatened species. Animals and plant life that exist nowhere else on the planet are now at risk of extinction, not just from the fire itself, but from starvation events. With a nationwide fire like our hypothetical scenario, animals that do survive would be left without a source of food or water. Animals like wombats, koalas, and cute quokkas would no longer exist in their natural habitat. And that's not even the worst part, since the burning itself would lead to a higher frequency and intensity of fires. Carbon dioxide is one of the greenhouse gases that absorbs radiation and prevents heat from escaping our atmosphere, ultimately trapping heat in with us that would otherwise escape into space and raising our planet's temperature. And how are these gases released into our environment? Usually by burning fuel, which is just what Australia has become. From a series of extrapolations from NASA's Global Fire Emission Database, it's believed that this bushfire season has released over 350 million tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere so far. When you consider that Australia's annual budget for the whole of last year was 532 million tons, that means bushfires have burned through 2/3 of the carbon budget in just one season. Now let's take it back to our theory where Australia, all flora, fauna, and buildings alike, is completely engulfed by bushfire. What kind of carbon kickback would we see? Well, based on that same NASA data extrapolation, and throwing in a little room for error, seeing as a lot of Australia is made up of desert, which would be harder to burn, and its urban scenes containing a lot of flammable man-made components, if the whole continent burned up at the current rate, it would produce around 54 billion tons of carbon dioxide. That's over 100 times the country's carbon emission output in 2018, and nearly 1.5 times the emissions output of the entire world. With that amount of carbon in the atmosphere, we'd suffer from more than just a bad haze and funny colored clouds. More than doubling the current global carbon emission kickout has the potential to drastically increase temperature anomalies across the globe, resulting in global sea level rises, massive droughts, even more extreme weather, and a greater likelihood of fires like this in the future. And not just in Australia. So as you can see, continuous bushfires are a disaster to Australia and should be avoided at all costs. But it's not all doom and gloom. Like I've said, this is just a hypothetical scenario. At least we'd like to think by November 2063, they'd have come up with a really big hose or something. So let's look on the bright side. Australia is no stranger to bushfires. In fact, they're so common they're integral to the way some of the flora reproduce and have forced other plants to evolve to avoid them. Australia has a history of dealing with and surviving catastrophic bushfires. Scientists predict it could take up to 100 years to reverse the environmental damage done to areas of forest land, and even longer to reverse the carbon emission impact. But the good news is, it's been brought to the global forefront. And with this attention, some solutions and endeavors to work together could help curb this recurring crisis. Obviously, my heart goes out to anyone affected by the recent wildfires. If you would like to help in any way you can, the best way to help is by donating to the relief funds listed in the video's description. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.